Welcome to Your Brain, a Personal Tour Seminar 4. This is Steve Saltway. Today we talk about the neurogenesis of human culture with a focus on primate foundations. We'll talk about the path that Mother Nature took to evolve the human brain from our nearest evolutionary ancestors. Now that's a complex path, spanning fruit trees to the chanting of Buddha phrases. Three major milestones stand out. First, the evolution of your brain amazingly depended on the ability of primates to forage for fruit in trees. That's an amazing capability, but it also sets the stage for compulsive gambling. Second, evolution of your brain depended on the ability of our primate ancestors to forge concepts like ripe fruit. That's a beneficial capability, but also sets the stage for tragic human disorders. For example, where loved ones cannot recognize the face of another. And then third, the evolution of your brain depended on advanced social cognition, our ability to cope with the social aspects of our environment. That's an absolutely advantageous capability, but it also sets the stage for autism spectrum disorders. Our brains could not evolve without these three fundamental capabilities. So as the subtitle states, chanting Nembutsu, the Buddha phrase, would not be possible before our ancestors learned to eat fruit in a tree. Welcome to the seminar. I hope you enjoy it. We begin with a sculpture, which embodies the stereotype. This sculpture was carved in the 13th century to commemorate the itinerant priest Kuya. Kuya lived in the 10th century and innovated a 6-syllable chant about the Buddha called Nembutsu. The 6 syllables of the phrase are represented by the little Buddhas coming out of Kuya's mouth. We just heard it in the introductory lead-in. Repeating the Nembutsu was thought to build merit and help you in your reincarnation. So think about that. The statue, the workmanship, the philosophy of the phrase and its meaning. Could one of our primate ancestors conceived and made such a thing? I think not. However, appreciating this outstanding work of art is not the same stereotypical thought that animals in general, and primates in particular, do not possess advanced skills. The hubris of this stereotype has been exposed by recent research, and let's take a look at that. But first, just a note that I've added 2 new books to the suggested reading list. Both are highly recommended. The first is by a well-known researcher and poses significant questions on how we understand animal behavior and culture. The second is a brilliant application of evolutionary science onto human psychology. Statements about unique human capabilities usually center around a few main themes. The first is that animals do not have the necessary brain circuits to, recognize tools and to use them as extensions of their body. Or maybe a few animals can use tools, but only animals with big brains. Another theme is that animals have no cultural transmission system. They don't have kindergartens or schools. They have no way of indoctrinating the next generation into the skills of the current. Probably the most prevalent is that animals have no real use of language. Animal research has shown that all these things are false. Animals clearly do have the capability to do these kinds of things, and they often do so in the wild. Let's look at a few examples. Here is a troop of chimpanzees in Africa using pliable limbs taken from trees to poke and then withdraw termites from mounds. Termites are a delectable source of protein for chimpanzees, and the chimps are quite adept at using these tools. But chimpanzees are not the only species capable of using tools. Let's go to the ocean. This porpoise is using a sponge to protect his nose. Porpoises delight in finding fish at the bottom of oceans, in crevices like this. But they have very sensitive noses, so they'll pull a sponge off the bottom and then cover their noses as they search for fish. Some will say, Okay, well, a big-brained animal like a chimp and a porpoise might have some advanced skills. So let's go to an animal that has a bird brain, the crow. Crows and ravens have tiny brains, but boy are they smart. This dude is a member of a murder of crows in Japan that roosts above pedestrian crosses, drops nuts into traffic, and then swoops down to eat the cracked nuts, but only when the crossing light has stopped traffic. This dude has a PhD in nut cracking. And then finally, let's take a look at cultural transmission systems. The meerkat is not just cute, they operate kindergartens. This mother meerkat is incapacitating a scorpion in order for her young pup to complete his scorpion eating lesson. The mother meerkat will assay the level of expertise of the pup and then increasingly allow the scorpion to have more and more function as the pup learns to handle it. At first, the mother will completely bite off the stinger, but then she'll partially disable it. And then finally, on graduation solo, the pup will face a completely alive and awake scorpion. Now, about language. I'd like to introduce a famous speaker of language, Alex the parrot. Alex was not only a good speaker, he could plead. Upon being dropped off at the vet's office, Alex said, "Come here. I love you. I'm sorry. Want to go back." Alex was trained for 30 years by Dr. Irene Pepperberg. She used a model rival training routine. In this routine, Alex observed Irene and a human assistant modeling a behavior. He would get attention from Irene by imitating the desired behavior. Alex started verbally correcting miscommunication between the humans, and voila, a famous parrot was discovered. Alex could name 50 different objects, recognize quantities up to 6, distinguish 7 colors and 5 shapes. Alex understood the concepts of bigger, smaller, and same, different. He had the intelligence of basically a 5-year-old and the emotional level of a 2-year-old, which showed in his pleading behavior. He was famous enough to be accorded an obituary in The Economist, and you don't get more famous than that. He clearly was an outstanding example of how an animal can use language. Note that the great parrots do not speak like this in the wild. Alex was trained for 30 years. So we have to remember that even though the capability of language may be in some animal brains, the actual demonstration of behavior may not appear in the wild. And there are other behaviors that don't appear in the wild. For example, at Northeastern University, researchers introduced parrots to smartphones and found that they love to call and chat with their friends. Isn't that nice? But on the other hand of the coin, parrots at the British Zoo formed a clique of trash-talking parrots and were so upsetting to visitors they had to be separated from the public. But with all due respect, animals can't and don't do nimbutsu. For all the awesome capabilities animals have, and we've never found an instance of an animal creating a statue like Kuya. No concert has ever been conceived by an animal to rival Bach. No painting to rival a Da Vinci. There really is something unique that happens in the evolution of a human brain, and the foundations of that uniqueness are what we're going to investigate next. Here is a video of the key milestones in the evolution of the human brain, and I want to highlight a specific change that is believed to be essential in the evolution of your brain. But let's start at the beginning of life and roll to the existence of non-human primates. Look at the ending picture. Our ancestors went into the trees. They began to exploit the forest canopy. Now, birds had done that before, but the change from land-based to forest canopy-based living was fundamental to the way your brain evolved. Let's take a closer look from some different ways. If we look at an evolutionary diagram of the human brain, we see that it passes through primates with many different branches. We see that the brain changes in a fairly complex way. Some areas of the brain get larger, some get more compact. A good way to visualize this is shown here. Here we map the evolution of a macaque-monkey brain to a human brain. The more yellowish the color in this diagram, the more the brain has expanded between the macaque-monkey brain and the human brain. Some areas grow by a factor of 32. The two areas we're going to talk about today are the prefrontal cortex, that's in the front of your brain as shown in this diagram, and the inferotemporal cortex, that's on the side of the brain by your ears. The prefrontal cortex is what really sets your brain apart from our ancestors. This diagram maps the percentage of your brain represented by the prefrontal cortex relative to the total surface of the frontal lobe. The human brain is off the chart. This part of your brain, and to some extent all the yellow areas shown on the other diagram, are essential in the evolution of human culture. But what was so special about these expanded parts of the primate brain? Do these areas underpin a host of new mental capabilities, or do they represent just a few fundamental new skills? And if just a few skills, how does that set the stage for human culture? Well, in my opinion, these areas represent only two fundamentally new ecological skills, which allowed the exploitation of one new ecological niche, the forest canopy. Behaviors necessary to exploit this new niche of the forest canopy were significantly different from those of the ancestors of primates. Let's take a look at rats, focusing on eating behavior. How does a rat eat? Well, here's a rat consuming a bit of food. Notice how the food is consumed. His paws grab a piece of food on the ground, lifts it to his mouth, and then chews. Very boring. Now let's take a look at a primate in the forest canopy. In this environment, there's no stable earth. The animal is perched on a branch which then moves relative to the food it is attempting to consume. There are complex spatial relationships of this three-dimensional arrangement of objects. Other animals, fruit, branches, it's quite a challenge to consume food in these environments. And once you've found it, the capabilities underpinned by these expanded areas of the brain allow primates to exploit this wonderful new niche, and that sets the stage for the evolution of human culture. We said the exploitation of this new ecological niche required several different kinds of capabilities. Thousands of pages have been written about what those capabilities entail, but I think the best way to summarize them simply is to say that those expanded areas of the brain provided skills to 1, efficiently forage, and 2, to form more effective social groups. This picture tells it all. Here's a troop of macaques in the middle of a tropical forest about to forage for food. They're doing so in a social group, and please note that there's an in group and an out dude. This set of behaviors underpins the march to human culture. Foraging is no walk in the park. A monkey troop's home range may have something on the order of 100,000 trees. 4% of those trees may be ripe at any one particular time. The fruit in such a range is highly clustered. 60% may be in one site, which might be one or a few number of trees. 0% in the others. Two fruits could look the same, but one could be toxic and one could have great protein benefit. Foraging is also done in the daylight, so it can be dangerous. Foragers are exposed to predators, and they compete with other primate groups. Chimpanzees are renowned at eating other monkeys, so one must be careful which trees to visit, and one must be aware of who is in that tree. There's a complex relationship to home group size. The larger the group, the better the search. However, large groups are more expensive compared to smaller groups, where there would be less internal competition and more food available for any one particular monkey. The expanded parts of the primate brain had a lot to deal with. Now, foraging, in my opinion, can be broken down into 4 essential capabilities, as signified by the pictures on this slide. Beginning with the picture on the left, recall that the distribution of fruit in a typical home range is very patchy. Different kinds of fruit ripen at different times. Different kinds of fruits have differential protein benefit. A monkey troop beginning its daily foraging walk must evaluate several kinds of future outcomes, and that is one of the capabilities that these expanded areas of the brain support. If you look at the next picture to the right, you'll see 2 different kinds of fruit. These fruits look completely different, and they taste completely different, but they have one thing in common: they ripen at the same time. A monkey troop encountering one of these fruits will immediately expand its search pattern to fruits of both types. That means their brains have mastered the abstract category of ripe fruit. The next picture shows the path of a foraging group as it approaches a good tree. When monkeys forage, they tend to focus on particular trees. They'll bypass some trees with fruit on them to get to a preferred source of fruit. That means that the brain areas are capable of focusing attention on a future goal several steps away. And then finally, monkeys, when they find a good tree, will exploit the fruit on that tree for only a certain period of time. So they must have a strategy to deal with a successful encounter of a fruit tree. However, monkeys must also have strategies to deal with the unexpected arrival of an aggressive competitor. The expanded areas of the brain, therefore, have the capability of supporting such behavior, sticking with exploiting the fruit on a tree for a certain amount of time, then shifting to a different tree. Can we find cells in the brain whose behavior map to these foraging behaviors? Well, the answer is yes, we can. Let's start with strategies. When a monkey finds a fruit-laden tree, the strategy that's typically expressed in behavior is to look for other trees with the same type of fruit. So this is a strategy of sticking with the current behavior. Keep on searching for the same type of fruit. However, if something unexpected happens, like a very aggressive monkey troop searching for the same type of fruit, the monkey will shift their behavior and look for a different kind of fruit. Can we find neurons in the brain that do that? Well, yes. We can't record from a monkey in a tree, but we can model the behavior in the lab. So here's our records from neurons in the primate brain that reflect a strategy to stay with the current behavior or shift to some other kind of behavior. The recordings are from the front part of the brain. The middle neuron is a stay neuron. The neuron indicates that the monkey will repeat the behavior that was successful in the past. The shift neurons are shown on either side. Shift strategy neurons indicate that the monkey will do some other behavior other than the behavior in the past. These kinds of cells directly underpin the kinds of behaviors we see in foraging, and they are a clear indication that this part of the brain can deal with higher order concepts like strategies, staying with a working behavior, or shifting to some other kind of alternate behavior. To see the functioning of this part of the brain in human behavior, it's instructive to learn what happens when this part of the brain is damaged by a stroke or by removal of the cortex to treat epileptic seizures. Gambling is a behavior that shows dramatic effects when these areas are damaged. There's a standard way to study gambling. It's called the Iowa Gambling Task. Subjects are presented with 4 decks. 2 of the decks, will say B and D, have high payouts, but pay out only infrequently. The other 2 decks, A and C, pay out less, but they pay out fairly consistently. Winnings over time will be much better with decks A and C compared to decks B and D. Subjects with no brain damage gravitate over time to the A and C decks. However, if this part of the brain is damaged, we see 2 behaviors develop. The first behavior is to persist in a losing strategy. Even though the subject reports knowing that B and D deck payouts infrequently, they will not shift to use the other decks. They're stuck in a losing strategy. In essence, they don't have the capability to shift when conditions warrant. A second behavior, is a sudden abandonment of a winning strategy, playing decks A and C. People with damage to the prefrontal cortex should not be allowed to get close to gambling tasks. They have a distinct challenge to orienting their behavior based on future or predicted outcomes. Another aspect of foraging behavior is the valuation of future outcomes. When a monkey finds a good tree with fruit on it, the natural indication is to pig out on that tree. However, since fruit is distributed in a patchy manner, fruits vary in protein benefits, competitors may be closing in, etc. There is a value to switching from that particular tree to another tree at a certain point. That's showed in this diagram on the right. As the monkey is exploiting a tree, there is a declining value of staying there and a rising value of switching. A kind of economic analysis goes on in terms of, what's driving behavior. It turns out we can find cells in the prefrontal cortex whose activities exactly mimic this kind of observed behavior. There's an area in the prefrontal cortex that increases its activity over time that drives a switching strategy. Notice this is driving a behavior away from the expression of the current behavior. It is overriding an inclination to stick with a natural behavior of eating the food right in front of your face. This kind of override is a sign of an advanced brain. Primate brains are very good at this kind of economic analysis in a variety of settings. A good example comes from the island of Bali in Indonesia. Local primates there have the equivalent skills to some sopranos or Corleones. In other words, great skills at robbery, barter, and extortion. The monkeys hang out at a famous temple, and then when tourists come and see the temple, the monkeys surreptitiously approach. They then steal an item of personal value, and in priority order. Cell phones first, then sunglasses, then hat. And then they scamper away. Later, they will trade the personal item for food at a rate that correlates to the value of the personal item. Cell phones get the most, hats the least. So this part of your brain is very, very smart. This aspect of your brain can also lead to a bias called the IKEA effect. It's in essence how we overvalue our work compared to others. That chest of drawers you frustratingly probably built from a flat pack, you will overvalue it compared to a store-bought item because you work so hard on it. This effect biases your views. Finally, this aspect of the primate brain helps us understand some irrational beliefs. In humans, this area of the brain focuses on the economic analysis only on a subset of the available information. Therefore, it's biased. The bias is termed the availability bias, and its operation is called the availability heuristic. In essence, this bias leads your brain to believe that the probability of an event is roughly equal to the ease in which you can recall the event. 80% of the time, that's a good way to estimate probability. But when the events in your life are not reflective of the overall information in the system, you get a bad result. Let's take an example. Now about the news. If you keep up with the news, then it's probably mostly negative, because if it bleeds, it leads. So negative news is easy to remember and recall, but that's not what is happening in the world, is ably set forth in these two recent books. The world overall is getting better, but the availability bias of our brain, conditioned by the focus on the news, that's negative, leads us to believe the world is going to heck. Be aware of this when you consume the news. Your outlook on life will be much more positive if you do. So let's look at the third aspect of foraging behavior. This one is focused attention to a goal several steps away. If you look at the foraging pattern shown on the left, you'll see that the monkey troop goes under a tree, then goes left to a fruit-bearing tree, goes under that tree, then towards the right, and then towards the target tree. So there's a particular sequence of behaviors that must be executed to get to a good tree. Can we find cells in the monkey prefrontal cortex that show such sequential behavior? Well, I wouldn't be talking about it if the answer wasn't yes. In this series of tasks, a monkey must perform a sequence of tasks, pulling, pushing, or turning a handle. Different monkeys were trained to execute different sequences of tasks to get reward. Some alternated movements, some paired movements, and some had 4 repeat movements. There were cells in that prefrontal cortex that predicted the successful execution of these kinds of sequential behaviors. So we find a rich complement of cells in the prefrontal cortex that drive sequences of behaviors, not associated with any particular response, but associated with the sequence of behavior. This is significant in the organization of monkey and human behavior. What are the effects of damage from stroke or surgical removal of this area in humans? Well, here we study this by constructing a task that's highly dependent on the sequence of actions. The task shown in the slide is called the Towers of London. There's a similar one called the Towers of Hanoi, played with circular discs. But this will be the one, and it'll suit our purposes quite nicely. The subject is shown in an initial configuration of balls on posts, and the task at hand is to produce the target configuration. A solution to the puzzle, A, would be to move the red ball from the shortest pole to the longest pole, and then move the blue ball to the shortest pole. I'll leave it to you to figure out option B. People with damage to this area in the prefrontal cortex are hopeless at such sequential tasks. They flounder about. They get halfway through a substantial sequence of behaviors, and then they abandon it. People with damage in this area of the brain often can't let themselves into their own house. They know they need to get their keys. They know they need keys to unlock a door. They know that the door will open if it's unlocked, but they can't get the sequence of behaviors down. It creates a very frustrating environment for the human subject, and it's highly sensitive to sequential changes. So if once the sequence of behaviors, is changed in terms of cues, if anything changes, the whole thing falls apart. The last capability underpinning foraging is the ability to learn abstract categories. We saw that monkeys displayed knowledge of a category of ripe fruit. When they find either one of the fruits shown on the left, they will then spontaneously alter their search patterns to incorporate both fruit. How do we study that in the lab? Well, we train the monkeys to discriminate between sets of stimuli. In this example, if the monkey responds to any of the images shown under A1 through A4, the monkey will be rewarded with juice. The B stimuli are not rewarded. The monkey reaches a very high level of performance rapidly. They get it quickly. Then we do a nasty trick. We reverse the meaning of the stimuli. B now means reward, and A is not rewarded. When this happens, a monkey will have to make a mistake to discover that the meaning has changed. But look closely at what happens next. Performance returns to virtually 100% on the next trial. The monkey has switched the meaning of all images in the category and behaves accordingly. This is very different from non-primates. A rabbit, for example, will only slowly recover performance in this kind of task. Building categories is a complex behavior for a primate brain. We're going to need to focus on two areas to explain this phenomenon. If we take a look at the monkey brain, we find two areas essential for this task. The prefrontal cortex, shown in the upper left, and an area of the brain we haven't seen until now, the inferior temporal cortex, shown on the lower right. Categories seem to get stored in the inferior temporal cortex under the direction of the prefrontal cortex. We know that because if we separate the connection between the two, then old categories are retained, but new categories are not built. I want to draw your attention to another aspect of the categories as shown on this slide. Categories are stored separately depending on one particular dimension, faces. The primate brain is highly sensitive to faces. Faces are subjected to quite substantial and sophisticated analysis. Shown here are recordings from the infratemporal cortex as we present various faces to a subject monkey. All the cells react strongly initially to faces, but then they show they're highly tuned to specific configuration of facial features. Some cells are highly sensitive to threat-like displays. Those are the open mouth with barred teeth. Others to neutral faces. These two expanded brain areas represent an advanced capability of the primate brain. It takes two areas working in concert to build categories, the prefrontal cortex to drive the process, and the infratemporal cortex to store the categories. Now, these categories represented by the inferior temporal cortex can also be quite complex. We can see that from looking at the results of damage in this area to humans. When this area is damaged, the resulting condition is called agnosia. There's two primary categories. In associative agnosia, the patient can reduce a model drawing but cannot name it. They have a motor problem. They have the motor program to draw the object using visual input, but they can't associate the visual input with the verbal identification of the object. In perceptive agnosia, the subject can produce the name of the object upon seeing it, but can't produce the motor program to reproduce the object. Agnosia is also different from memory loss. In memory loss, the category memory is irretrievable regardless of the sense modality. In this instance, the gentleman looking at a set of keys does not know or cannot respond with what they are. When he picks them up, he still doesn't know or can respond with what they are. However, a woman suffering from agnosia recognizes keys when they pick them up. She would also know how to use them. She can do this by using some sense modality other than vision. This can be a great benefit to those with agnosia. For example, when someone cannot recognize the face of a loved one. While the subject visually may not recognize faces, the experience of smelling a particular cologne or watching the subject walk or gesture can bring back memories of that person. However, it can also mean a condition that can be hard to detect as other senses compensate for the presence of agnosia. It's a good time to invite Homer back, and Homer is concerned. He thinks he has to climb up in trees and eat fruit to be human. Well, not exactly. But the insight that foraging underpins some of the most dramatic evolution of the brain gives us a new understanding of brain function and recovery. Since humans and monkeys share these areas, research can be accelerated, and that's a good thing. And our knowledge of these areas is expanding rapidly. Let's turn our attention to how the other impacts of expanded capabilities in the primate brain. Social cognition. Social cognition is gaining benefit by watching, interacting, and/or imitating members of your own or other species. It's a widespread behavior in animals. However, this capability reaches its peak in primates and humans. It dramatically helps in foraging, as we've just seen, but it's also very impactful in better defense against predation, as shown here as a troop of baboons drive off a wayward and still hungry leopard. However, social cognition has its trade-offs, and in fact, social cognition in primates has reached the level of soap operas. Time will not permit us to look at all the aspects of social cognition, but we can hit some highlights of its development and a couple of its quintessential capabilities. Social cognition seems to develop in three overall phases. Unsurprisingly, in the first phase, it's mother knows best. Infants benefit substantially from observing and imitating dear old mom. In this example on the slide, an infant is learning that mom knows what food to eat and what to avoid. In the second phase, it represents juveniles learning from the best dude in the troop. Here a young monkey is learning how to crack nuts from the best nutcracker in the home troop. These experiences seem to introduce a category of us to the young monkey. The home troop is an in-group to which the monkey belongs. In most monkey troops, when males reach adulthood, they migrate to a new troop. This migration helps minimizing inbreeding and its deleterious effect. So in the third phase of social cognition and learning, it's easiest to see that in migrated adult males, but it's present in all adults. In this phase, conformity to the group norms seemed to dominate. The slide shows an example of this. An adult male who as a juvenile learned that his home troop consumed blue corn rapidly switches to the preferred corn color of his new troop, red corn. We'll study the implications of this in a later seminar, but for now I want to focus on a particular behavior clearly shown to underpin such social learnings. Imitation. It's a widespread behavior in animals. However, this capability reaches its peak in primates and humans. If you don't believe me, just take a look at these two gorillas in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They've learned to imitate the pose of the rangers when the rangers pose for selfies. In this section, we're going to look at the fundamental aspects of imitation, and by looking at these fundamentals, we can increase our understanding of our brain and its underpinnings in human society. Imitation consists of three essential capabilities. The first is to determine what to imitate. The world of a primate is a target-rich environment. What in that environment should be chosen to imitate? The second is to determine how to imitate. What are the muscle movements or motor programs that need to be executed in order to imitate a given behavior? What about the intention of that behavior? And third is to get rewarded for imitating. There must be a reinforcer here, either direct consummation of reward or the avoidance of danger. Sometimes simply looking at something is rewarding in and of itself. This macaque in a hot bath in Japan shouldn't be looking at the mobile phone, but clearly it finds the experience rewarding. What could he be looking at? There's a clear prioritization of objects that your brain analyzes when it determines what to imitate. The clear winner of that prioritization scheme is faces. Here, there are recordings from neurons in the temporal lobe as they are presented cartoon outlines of faces. The faces vary on 37 different dimensions. Different neurons are tuned to different dimensions. The neurons shown on the bottom of the slide are sensitive to face aspect ratio, that's the ratio of face length to face width, inter-eye distance, the eye aspect ratio, that's the ratio of eye length to width, and the iris size. Neurons analyze faces mapped to these dimensions with tremendous specificity. So one of the first things your brain does in analyzing objects in the environment is to determine what object is a face, and after that, what are the specifics of that face per these dimensions. Now, many of these, same dimensions underpin the Face ID system in your phone. These metrics are significant in defining who we are and even our emotional state. Once your brain has determined an object has a face, it will subject the object to further analysis. The essential question, is it attached to something alive? What? How does your brain determine something's alive? Well, it evaluates the object on the dimension of biological motion. Biological motion is far easier to show than to describe, so let's take a set of lights and have those lights move in a certain way. Your brain is hardwired to interpret the movement of these lights as an individual who's moving and then walking. Your brain interprets the lights as being attached to the joints of the arms and legs. If we look at a different pattern of lights, we can see this dude doing a little dance. Your brain will infer emotional states and even gender from such patterns of movement. Can we see neurons in monkeys in which detect such movements? Yes. We show monkeys sets of lights under two conditions. The first is a pattern of lights that represent movements that could be associated with the joints of a monkey walking down a path. The other pattern of lights represents random movements of lights, as shown here. The actual movement of lights in each case is the same. We find brain cells that are highly attuned to biological motion. They react to the motion of lights that represent joint movement, not random movement. And that is one way your brain determines something is alive and potentially worth imitating. The existence of brain cells that determine it's alive for objects could be used to explain a very surprising encounter that people have on safaris in Africa. Here's an example from one that Becky and I had. We were amazed at how close the animals got to the vehicle. Let me give you a quick example. This leopard is going to walk right under the feet of the tracker in the front of the Jeep. I believe it was because the leopard did not detect biological motion of the Jeep. We were a big rock or something like that. Given that we were a rock, okay to walk close by it. And that's just what the leopard did, because it did not detect any biological motion of the limbs, from anybody or the Jeep. Further proof of this theory was given when someone stood up in the Jeep and moved their limbs. A close-by lion really noticed. Needless to say, they sat down quickly and quietly. The part of your brain that subjects objects to analysis and looks for special aspects of faces is in the inferotemporal cortex, shown on the red circle. Some people call this area of the brain the object analyzer. It breaks down objects into various categories, where faces and alive things are special categories. This part of the brain then represents that information to other parts of the brain. Other people call this area of the brain the what system. It's basically the part of your brain that subjects objects to analysis, forms categories about those objects, and then provides that analysis to other parts of your brain. The prefrontal cortex, for example, uses this analysis for strategy selection and valuation. This is an extremely important part of your brain overall, and it's absolutely essential in determining who to imitate. And once the primate has determined there's a who to imitate, it will proceed to determine how to imitate. The simplest way for a primate brain to determine how to imitate is to follow the gaze of an alive face. The brain does this so quickly, the assumption is that it does reflexively. And we can show that in an experiment. In this experiment, we're going to have a monkey fixate upon an object, and then we're going to show him a cue. The cue is a monkey face, either looking to the right or to the left. After that, we're going to show the monkey a target. The target could be on the left or the target could be on the right. The monkey must visually follow the target. If we show a target on the left, the monkey must move his eyes to the left. If we show a target on the right, the monkey must quickly look to the right. Note that the gaze of the cue monkey could be the same or different to the side on which the target appears. If they're different, it's called incongruent. If they're the same, it's called congruent. If we measure the response time of looking, we find that it takes longer in the incongruent condition. That's because the brain of the monkey had analyzed the gaze of the cue monkey in less than 1/10 of a second, determined the direction of gaze, and then started the eyes moving in that direction. When all of a sudden, we showed a target for the opposite side. The monkey has got a course correct, and it looks back the opposite way. That takes a lot more time than the congruent condition when there's no course correction. This gaze following happens so fast, it seems to be reflexive. So your brain is wired to analyze 1, the objects that are alive faces, 2, determine the direction of gaze of that face, and 3, follow the direction of gaze. After that, your brain then subjects any movements observed to intention analysis. Let's look at that next. This kind of analysis is performed by mirror cells. Recall that we saw them in Seminar 1. To briefly review their function, mirror cells encode the goal of a motor act. Look at the picture on the right. We see brain recording histograms of a single mirror cell below a cartoon representing a movement. Sections 1 and 3 show that this particular mirror cell encodes grasping to eat. It fires when the monkey observes a human grasping a food object and bringing it to her mouth, as well as when the monkey grabs a food object and brings it to its own mouth. Sections 2 and 4 show that the mirror cell does not react to grabbing motions, either performed or observed. And I want to stress that the analysis here is on the motor goal, bringing food to mouth, and not the internal state of the person or animal observed, hungry or not. The mirror cell attempts to drive execution of a motor object, not to understand the motivation of the observed. This will be very important in our next lecture on human unique brain capabilities. Having found the who to imitate, and then analyzing the how to imitate, and then actually doing the motor object the who was doing, do we get rewarded? Yes. Not only can performing the motor object get us a reinforcer, just looking can be reinforcing. In essence, your brain is enjoying the view. We can show that in an experiment. We study an area of the brain called the parietal lobe, shown here. We showed not just monkey faces, but other parts of a monkey, and we get some very interesting results. Viewing pictures of a subordinate monkey is unpleasant. Looking at a gray square is neutral. But if we use a picture of a dominant monkey's face, we find looking at it rewarding. And then finally, the most rewarding was that of a hindquarters of a female monkey. I will note that the subjects were male, and I'm going to leave it at that. Let's bring Homer back to weigh in on a summary of this set of observations. The first thing Homer would say is, wow, I had no idea that my brain was so into facial gaze. Facial analysis, determining what's alive, and using target gaze to set the stage for imitation are fundamental activities of your brain in everyday life and in the creation of culture. When those circuits go awry, they result in a social complication like autism spectrum disorder, or many others. The second observation from Homer is, monkey see and monkey do is actually a positive statement. Imitation is a fundamental tool of teaching pedagogy and cultural transmission. Imitation is not unique to primates. Remember Meerkat Kindergarten? Primates, however, take the fundamentals of imitation, facial and gaze analysis, to new levels of sophistication, and that helps set the stage for unique aspects of human culture. In our last section, we're going to look a bit more deeply at areas of the brain underlying social cognition. Your brain has the same areas expanded as well as new areas for social cognition compared to non-human primates. Let's take a look at those non-human primate ones today. Now let's be clear. Social cognition is widespread. It's an adaptive behavior in all mammals, and shown here was mice. See, I don't always talk about rats, rhesus monkeys in the middle, and then humans on top. We saw in Seminar 3 how rodents use social olfactory cues from others to help determine what food to eat. There are rituals in mating. Non-human primates take that to the next level, and humans beyond that. There is a vast dispersed network of brain centers used to enable social cognition. This network is expressed in more and more brain space as we traverse the tree of evolution to humans. But can we deduce some high-level principles of this network? In short, yes. To see the principles, let's break down a social scene. First, there are agents, living bodies with faces, bodies, and shapes. This is in contrast to an object like a rock or a coconut. Objects have shape and may move, but they are not biological. And recall, your brain can detect biological motion. Then there are the agent actions. What is one agent doing to another? Hitting, growling. Note that the focus here is on what one agent is doing. And then there's the interaction between agents. Here the agents seem to be connected in a sequence of steps that relate to an overt act, let's say like grooming, which is a reciprocal act of removing lice from the external body hair. Now, it turns out there's an extensive area in a primate brain devoted to just this kind of cognition. It is not active with objects. It is not active with just one agent doing something. It is exclusive to social interaction, that is, sequences of behaviors. Now, these results are very recent and important. It is as if the brain is forming a social object. Recall how in Seminar 1 we saw how perceptual systems build complex objects like Jennifer Aniston or Ryan Gosling or Homer Simpson from low-level visual information. Well, this might be a similar process, but building up a social interaction and social object from a far more complex set of stimuli. That is not to say that non-human primates are social nitwits. They, as a species, as many species, display an admirable range of exemplary social behaviors. For example, altruism and fairness. Let's take one example from marmosets, the cute little dudes we see here. Marmosets are cooperative breeders, and by that I mean infants receive care not from just one of their parents, but other helpers in the group. This is different from chimpanzees and other apes. But marmosets are not alone in the animal world. Meerkats, magpies, wolves, and foxes are all known to be cooperative breeders. Now, in several experiments, marmosets can be shown to be altruistic. They will work to give food to another hungry member of the group. whether or not they are related or paired. Now, this is an advanced behavior, and the social circuits of the brain make this possible. Note that this is not shown in all primate species. There's subtle differences between the brains of those who do and those that don't show this behavior. Research is active onto what those differences are. Now, non-human primates not only can display altruism, but they have a keen sense of fairness, which spring from these circuits. The best way to show you is with this video. Here, the renowned researcher Frans de Waal, author of the book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?, which is on the reading list, describes and demonstrates in a very famous experience.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group, they know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, it's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
I hope these videos gave you some insight into just how complex the social capabilities of primates are. Now there's one more behavior I also want to present, cooperation. Here you see a picture of an experiment where 3 chimpanzees had to cooperate to receive a reward. They had to work together or it didn't work. Sometimes all 3 had to work, sometimes 2 of the 3 could accomplish the task. There were some very surprising results in this experiment. First, the maximum cooperation required punishment. Initially, most chimps tended to cooperate, but without punishment, cooperation declined over time. The punishment addressed freeloaders, chimps that did not have to work but received a reward. Once a chimp became known as a freeloader, chimps would avoid them if possible. If the freeloader could not be avoided, then the other chimps would purposefully work to not receive a reward so that the offending freeloader wouldn't get any. This is called altruistic punishment, since the punishers are hurting themselves to punish someone else. Strange as it may seem, such behavior is widely expressed in living creatures. Plants have shown to punish bacteria. Fish have been shown to punish cleaner fish who do not do their work. But on the positive side, as long as there is punishment in the system, at the end of the day, when the behavior has reached steady state, Cooperation is 5 times greater than competition. That's a positive statement about a primate brain, which sets the stage for your brain. But do humans and non-human primates actually share all the same capabilities in social cognition? Clearly no. A human uses brain circuits that identify social context, makes inferences about the mental states and likely actions of others, and estimates cost and behaviors of different transactions, makes a decision, learns from the result. These behaviors use shared brain systems inherited from our non-human primate ancestors, with one major exception. Only the human brain has an area called the temporoparietal junction, or TPJ for short. We're going to look at this in the next lecture and what that area of the brain means for a range of human behaviors. For now, it suffices to say that you are aware of what the other humans may be thinking, and you take that into planning your behavior. Primates do not have such brain systems. They can be empathetic to other primates, they can feel other primates' pain, but a large volume of research says they do not think deeply about the mental states of others prior to making a decision. Time for Homer again. Now, Homer says 2 things. The first is, seems to me that a primate brain is pretty smart and social. Here, Homer is talking about non-human primates. Many of the skills and capabilities that we might think are human unique are present in our evolutionary ancestors. Now, those capabilities may or may not be typically shown in the wild, but they're readily apparent in the laboratory. That means a non-human primate brain has capabilities foreshadowing human capabilities. The human species evolved with inherited capabilities perhaps not readily apparent from primate ancestors, but which could be rapidly used once certain triggering events occurred. We'll see the impact of that next. The second of Homer's points is, you've got to be careful of the interpretation of complex skills. It's a very, very common thing for humans to ascribe intention to the acts that they observe. An animal may just be imitating an act with little intention other than to enjoy the view. We need to be careful on this and not let, one of our unique human skills cloud our observation of animal behavior. In other words, your dog or your cat does not think like you. Before we close, let's look at what happened in our evolutionary past after our primate ancestors entered the forest canopy. Let's continue the video we saw in terms of our evolution. Did you see it? It was the emergence of the savanna, the extensive grasslands of Africa. Tectonic activity along the Rift Valley raised vast portions of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania to an elevated plateau. Our ancestors were now in grassland. The forest had left. The fruit, the berries, the leaf buds our easygoing non-human primates ancestors had consumed were no longer available. We had to adapt. In other words, humans did not leave the forest left humans. What did that do to our brains? Well, in Seminar 5, we're going to look at human brains in all their glory. The goal of the seminar will be to investigate and present the unique abilities of human brains that give rise to the vibrant culture around us. I tried to pick one item that could represent that culture, and I came up with this: switched on Bach. Not only is this album an example of classical music of great beauty, but it's also an example of a technological achievement, the Moog synthesizer. Here, a marriage of technology and classic culture is extending the beautiful music in one unique package. What kind of brain could produce this kind of object? It turns out there's a unique underlying capability that is essential into the production of such an object, and it's represented by this film. I want you to watch this film and think about what you think these triangles are doing. You got that? Watch the film and then think about what the triangles are doing. As you do that, you will use a human unique part of your brain. So enjoy. See you next time. I hope you enjoyed the seminar. This is Steve Saltwick.
No.